Kara Life podcast with me, Phyllis Mackenzie. If you're new here, make sure before you begin, check out all the links in the description for today's guest and also mine. Keep up with all previous episodes and also upcoming episodes. But today, as always, we have a new guest joining us. And this guest today, once again, is an author. We have a lot of authors here on the podcast, but for the first time ever, we have a series author. For the first time in this year, actually, a series author. He has written a lot of very fun books, but I want him to talk about it on his own. I don't want to give any spoilers. So, ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you, it's J.V Hilliard. Hi, Jay.
Hey, how are you? Thank you very much for having me on the show. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. I didn't want to spoil anything. I just want you to introduce yourself in a nutshell. Who are you?
Yeah, sure. So I am an author of the Warminster Saga, which is an epic fantasy meets dark fantasy series, which is a 4-book series. The first 2 books are out. I know we're going to talk about them in a little bit. Third one comes out here in July of 2023, and the final book will be out closer to the holidays of this year, and we'll finish up the series. But if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings or Dungeons and Dragons, or you've enjoyed Game of Thrones, that's the kind of genre I write in and the type of books you'll expect. So they're pretty deep dives into the history of the realm and deep character explanations where you begin primarily, with, a handful of heroes and one very bad villain. And you follow them through the 4-book series. So that's a little bit about the Warminster Saga. Me as an author, I started my authorship during COVID. I'm an entrepreneur by trade, so I have a number of businesses that I own. And when COVID hit, I had nothing to do. And I'm one of those people that have to have something to do all the time. And my wife wagged a finger at me and said, no, you're not sitting around doing nothing. You're going to drive me crazy. Do something. And writing a book was on my bucket list of things to do. So I sat down and I wrote what I thought was going to be a single book. And it turned out that in order to get it published, my publisher wanted it to be a series. And frankly, it makes sense. In my genre, almost all, books are part of a series. So for me, I had to make a commitment to do that. And, 3 years later, I'm here now, almost at the end of the series, transitioning into my career as an author and having a fun time doing it. So that's how it kind of started and where it's headed, the trajectory. So it's been a lot of fun so far.
Yeah, actually, you're not alone because also this podcast began during COVID. So we didn't have things to do. School was closed. Everything was shut down or stuck in the house. And I don't know how to stay still. I love to stay indoors, but I don't know how to just stay still and do nothing. So Kara Life was born. So I do understand how you began your writing process. But why did you choose this genre? You are the first author in your genre who has been on this show.
Well, for a few reasons. First is I've been a fan of it for a long time. When I was younger and still in school, I had an English teacher that read us The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings for the last month or month and a half of school. I don't know how he got permission to do it, but I was in 4th grade and I fell in love with the genre. And that Christmas, I asked my uncle, who was like a second father to me, I asked him for a copy of The Hobbit for Christmas, and he ended up getting me not only a copy of The Hobbit, but he also bought me my first box set of Dungeons and Dragons so we could play. And my uncle and I had a kind of a special relationship. He was paralyzed in the war. He was a Marine. And when he got home, he had very limited things that he could do. And one of the things he could do was write. So at a very young age, I was watching him write things for magazines and like Pulp Fiction and serials and stuff like that, mostly in the horror genre, or suspense genre. But for me, I could never get away from fantasy or sci-fi. I just fell in love with it. And so the other thing that we ended up doing when I was younger was we started playing Dungeons and Dragons. It was a form of escapism for him, out of his paralysis. It was a way that he could be somebody else and kind of step out in his own imagination. And it helped me grow my own imagination. And so we started playing the game. And what I did was I kind of memorialized within the novels, a trip of many of those characters and villains and campaigns that we had during our role-playing sessions. It's not exactly the same fit, but, it made for a good, a sort of a kickstart to the story, which then became, just like a D&D campaign. It went on, if you're familiar with the game and or ever played it or played video games where you level up, it was the same thing. It started out with the characters that, needed to grow, whether it was personally or through their skill sets to defeat the big bad evil guy, and in this case, the big boss is
Mhm.
somebody that I had faced off in one of my D&D campaigns and liked it well enough, that I created my own world around it, as you know, I'm not allowed to use many of the same forms and functions that come with the game. So I created the realm of Warminster, and my monsters are unique. My characters are unique. The races within are unique. The magic system's unique, and it's just been a lot of fun. So it was a part answer to your question is I've always loved the genre best. The other part was I kind of grew up in it, and it was I think the passion that my uncle brought to it and sort of, what he left me with, I decided to kind of memorialize into this series, and it's really kind of taken off.
Hmm. You've mentioned D&D a lot, and I just wanted to say I've never played it. I don't even know how the game goes, but I've always wanted to because anybody I know when I was growing up was like, oh, D&D this, D&D that. And those are not even friends, they're people from online. These are online friends. And I was like, I want to play this game. If there's something I want in life, it's to learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And you cannot imagine the high that I was at when I saw the movie because I'm like, if the movie is so good, what about the game though? The
Yeah.
game must be engaging as well. So there are a lot of things that I find similar here. Also, in the Lord of the Rings, I really, when it comes to classifying, I could classify the Lord of the Rings higher than the Hobbit itself. I don't know why. I
Hmm.
don't know why the first three movies were better than the Hobbit. I know some people will say otherwise, but I see the other way around. So if your books are somewhat like that, if your books are on the same path, paddling up the same river with the Lord of the Rings and D&D, I promise you they're going to be one of my favorite books yet. Because
Well, they
I read
are.
a lot. I read
Yeah.
a lot.
Oh,
Yeah, but it's
I can
hard
tell you
for
have
me to
authors on
actually
your show
find a
all the
book I
time.
enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's
look, if you
hard.
have guys like me on your show, I know that you must enjoy reading, so that's good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. I'm an author
Yeah.
and
And
I
you're,
love reading as well. So
yeah.
finding a book that you can channel with, a book that you can have on the shelf and say, you know what, that book, that's my collector's item. I love that book so much that it's now a collector's item. That's how I view most of my books, like The Lord of the Rings and also The Hobbit, Harry Potter, several of the Stephen King books, and also R.L. Stein. I've been trying to get him on this show, but it's hard. It's hard to get that man. It's
Yeah.
hard to book him. It
I would
really is.
imagine.
Yeah, but finding authors like you who have books that are not what people are gonna think of when they walk into the bookstore, but it's on the same path. It's refreshing, it's new, and it's something personal also to the author because you can proudly say, you know what? If you love Stephen King, you're gonna love my book. If you love TRR, you're gonna love my book. If you love R.L. Stein, you're gonna love my book. So I respect authors like you a lot.
Well, thank you. And I patterned myself on authors like that. They were sort of my heroes in the genre, right? So, for me, I mean, Tolkien had a way of when he wrote Lord of the Rings and when he wrote The Hobbit, he created his own world. He was basically the grandfather of the fantasy genre. Like before him, you had many folk tales and lore and legends and stuff like that that were told. But for the most part, when he created Middle Earth, that genre of book was created, and all of us follow in his footsteps, in my opinion. And you're right. I mean, I
Mhm.
like look, Dungeons and Dragons is one of those games that's unique. It's not like a board game. You could play Dungeons and Dragons for years, and you create a character in the same way you would create a video game character. Your avatar in the video game, you're creating a character that you're playing, but you're playing it in your head as a role play. And you're playing it with other characters that you come together, in a party setting to accomplish something, recover the stolen crown jewels or, defeat the dragon or whatever it might be. And it's a lot of fun. And as for me, as a dungeon master, the person who runs the game sessions for D&D play, you have to be a good storyteller, because if I'm telling you what's in a room or what's in a cave or what the dragon looks like, I have to be able to describe that to you. And so I think that helped me hone my abilities as a storyteller. And I just had to take that from sort of the spoken word and put it into written form. And that was a bit of a chore to learn how to do that instead of, telling you about something that's happening. Now I had to write it and you've got to imagine it in your head. And we've got to be close enough, that, what I'm saying and what you're seeing are nearly the same. And I think that was my challenge out of the gate. But, to your point, this is, if you like that genre, if you like those books, this is, I think, a story that you'll find endearing. It has a lot of the same struggles in it. There's a coming of age story. There is sort of like a chosen one versus false prophet. So there is kind of that, Sauron meets Frodo or Sauron versus Bilbo, that kind of stuff that's in there too, except with different characters and obviously a different plot line. But that's really where it comes from. And there's such a forbidden love, and things like that. So you'll like that. And getting back to your other question, I think the reason that the Lord of the Rings movies were better, and I agree with you 100%, is that they were all very large books, right? They were epic fantasy novels in the 400 or 500 range. And so you could take each of those, like The Fellowship, and make its own movie out of it. What Peter Jackson did was he took The Hobbit, which is a young adult fiction novel that has about 150 pages in it, and tried to make it, two or three, and at that point you're now making stuff up and you're putting things in that may not have necessarily belonged in the movie. So, and it got a little tiresome. And I think that, Lord of the Rings was just a better series. It was easier adaptations. Not that I didn't like The Hobbit. I did, but not nearly as much as I liked Lord of the Rings. So.
Yeah, it's like the Dark Tower by Stephen King. You'll find that the movies are not that captivating. They're actually more confusing than the book, because if you watch the movie itself, it's everywhere. Story is just everywhere. I find it more confusing. Grabbing books themselves, reading the story slowly by slowly, getting the questions all on your own, getting the answers all on your own. But when you watch the movie itself, it's like they were trying to compensate some of the things they took out from the book. So you find the stories just everywhere, and they ruined the thing. It's supposed to be a good book, but they ruined it when they flip it into a show and everything.
Well, I think that's a common problem for many people. I think there's a truism there, in the sense that when you always hear when someone says, well, the book was better than the movie. And of course it's going to be, because as you're reading the book, everything is perfectly forming in your head. So that's the way you see it. And even if it was the author said this is blue and you read it as green, it doesn't matter. In your head, it was perfectly formed. And a movie theater or a Netflix show, or a TV show of any kind, it's a different medium, right? So instead of it being immersive and you're sitting by your fire, flipping page by page, engrossed in it, and your own imagination takes over and is spelling it out for you, and you see that character, instead you're seeing an adaptation of that in a different medium. And in this case, it could be film, it could be a different form of art. And so therefore it gets distorted. And oftentimes people will say, I like books better than the movie, because in their head, the book is perfect because that's the way they read it. That's the way they envisioned it. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. I mean, you mentioned Dark Tower. I'm a big Stephen King fan too. I write not just epic fantasy, but my fantasy novels also have a bit of a dark spin to them, because I like the Gothic. I like Bram Stoker and Dracula. And I try to instill those things in there because I want my villains to, I want the people that are reading about my villains to fear them, or to be, in awe of them, and make them a little bit more superhuman, but like I've been reading the Lee Child's Jack Reacher books for many, many years. And Jack Reacher in the books is like 6'7". He's this monster of a guy. And then you watch the movie and it's Tom Cruise. And Tom Cruise is like 5'6", and it's like, wait a minute, that's not Jack Reacher, and just because of that, it kind of jars you out of the scene. So I get what you're saying. And I think, I try to write my books very, deep in a Tolkien-esque or Hawthornian way, that there's enough rich content and backstory and details, that when you walk away, you're like, wow, like I really got engrossed in the realm, and I like being in the realm of Warminster in the same way many people like being in the realm of Middle Earth for Tolkien.
Speaking of your books, your covers are spectacular. I want to know who is the illustrator because they have done a very fantastic job with these covers. I can't even wait to see what the cover of book 4 will be like.
Well, thank you for that. Large Gallagher did the all of the illustrations. I gave her the ideas for the covers, but she came back and really knocked my socks off with it. And I get more compliments on her covers than anything about the books. I mean, people like generally really like them. And I think if you saw that, at on a bookshelf in a bookstore, you're going to pick that book up and turn it over, and read the blurb
Mhm.
and see what's inside because they really do pop.
Mhm. I think you'll need to send me her contact because for the that I'm writing, I think she has to do my illustrations because the story that I have inside is so what can I even say? It's so mind-blowing epic that I myself can't even come up with a cover for my own book because I have all these characters that I want to be on the cover. I want it to be in a certain way, and I think that she's done such a fantastic job with your book. I think I should bring her on to mine as well
I'd
to
be
do
happy
my
to make
future
the
illustrations.
introduction. Yeah, yeah. She's in the United Kingdom, and so when I work with her, it's it's a I think that I think that culture generally is especially like from an illustrator perspective. I think she gets the idea of what needs to be in this genre, and I think you'll enjoy working with her. I'll definitely connect you guys after the show.
Okay, let's just talk about the books themselves. Starting from book 1,
Sure.
I want you to tell us from the cover, how did that, how did you come up with that? How did you want that to be your covers for your book 1?
Sure. So there's really two main storylines in book one, yeah, that converge eventually. The face in the clouds, almost the godlike face in the clouds, represents one of the main characters named Damus Alaric. And Damus is part of a religious sect that prays to a god of knowledge, and that god bestows knowledge upon his sect through a series of prophecies. And he's gone to school. You mentioned you liked Harry Potter before. This is not like Hogwarts. This is more like it's called the Cathedral of the Watchful Eye. And he goes to
Mm-hmm.
the cathedral to learn to harness his powers. And many of these seers and prophets see things in a different way. Sometimes they see them reflected in a mirror, or other time in a fire, or they read cards, or they have dice. In this case, Damus sees things in his dreams, and they're almost too real for him. And as a result, he sees the return of a fallen keeper, a man that had this power, that used his power in a way that was so, heretical that that their God punished him by stealing his sight and making him blind. And it's taken him 20 years to return to take revenge on the sect. And so Damus is that man in the clouds, and he was born blind. So his eyes are white, like you see on the cover. But even though he was blind, his visions allow him to see things that are imparted by his God, this ancient, as I call them, named Arud. And with this blessing, he now has physical sight alongside his metaphysical sight. And so that's the way he kind of goes, and he learns through his dreams that this man is coming. And really in book one, he's the last keeper, the last person that has this knowledge from their gods that can see that the coming of this big bad evil guy and what they need to do to stop him. And the other part of it is this dark silhouetted figure on the bridge. That castle in the book
Mm-hmm.
is known as Castle Vulcaneer, and it guards the borderlands from cryptids, these monsters and bad things that roam in the Dragon's Breath Mountains. And they have this bridge that goes across to the Dragon Breast, where many traders and merchants and pilgrims all come by, and it's basically the last line of defense. They are on the frontier, and that bridge is guarded by Sir Ritter of Vulcaneer, the man that's on the bridge, and he's an elven race. So if you're familiar with Tolkien, he's known as a raven elf, but his plight is that he's of mixed blood. He's part human and part elven, and so he's looked down upon by both cultures. And so his job is really one of the most thankless jobs in the kingdom, which is really to guard this borderland, even though it's super important for trade and super important for, for people moving back and
Mhm.
forth throughout the realm. No one else wants it because it's so dangerous. So they give it to this guy. And it's his, um, for him, it's his validation. It's not only does he take this, what in my realm is called Trollborn, his mixed blood heritage. How can he overcome that? So that people don't look at him as being mixed blood. They look at him as a hero. And he, of course, meets, Princess Adeline Elspeth, who is a Vermilion elf, the highest caste of elves, and they're not allowed to consort with people of mixed blood. And yet she and Ritter
Mhm.
meet, and they have this forbidden romance that starts in book one. So the cover is really the ominous beginning of the return of this big bad evil guy named Great Taurus the Mad. And it features Damus and his sight that is showing the coming of this dark, foreboding, future with Ritter guarding the bridge. And that's really where the idea for the cover came from.
Mhm. And the story itself, the big bad wolf of book one. What's his villain backstory?
Sure. So Great Taurus the Mad is part of the Keepers, which are these guys and gals that have this power that's bestowed by the Ancient of Knowledge, and their jobs are to go out into the realm, very similar to like maesters from Game of Thrones, and they're sages and wise men and women who go and counsel kings and queens and emperors and empresses and barons alike, in the hopes of providing this knowledge that's bestowed by the gods so that they can do the right things and govern their people well. But he, unbeknownst to the reader in book one, you find out a little bit later, he violates the one commandment in their faith that they're not allowed to use this knowledge for personal gain. It's like, thou shalt not use this knowledge for thine own gain, basically was what it is. And in the beginning, you don't know why he did it. But his God punished him because he was so high, and he was like the first keeper of the cathedral, sort of like, the number two guy in all the realm, for this. And his God punished him in a way where he not only took his ability to see the future, but he also took his physical sight away from him as punishment for using this to it for his own gain. And he escapes, his fate and retreats, away, and, 20 years pass, and he finally regathers enough power to come back and take vengeance, on what people think are just the Cathedral of the Watchful Eye. But in the end, it's really on the realm for abandoning him, in his time of need. And so he is a creature, that's human, but his God has not only stolen his vision, but it's literally stolen his eyes. And so he has these sort of like eye sockets that bleed very slowly in forever, and so he covers his
Mhm.
face this rag, and it just bleeds through all the time. And he's in constant pain as a reminder for what he did. And he himself is trying to break this curse, and Damus is in the way of that. And that's how the two come together, for what'll be several epic battles,
Mhm.
with
The
their
boss fight.
magical powers. Yeah, that's right. To kind of save the realm. And book one is Damus learning that he has these powers and learning the return of Great Taurus the Mad, and what he does to get prepared in the future books to fend him off and hopefully defeat him.
And every story needs like that tiny character who's always on the background, but is always so significant, and readers and also anybody watching is always connected with them, like Dobby in Harry Potter, and anybody who has watched, what's this Disney show? Oh my God, what Moana? There was this chicken, Hey
Oh
Hey.
yeah.
You were very connected to that chicken, and you didn't want anything bad to happen to it. So in your first book, The Last Keeper, do you find characters like this? They're small but significant to the reader.
Yeah, so there's a few actually. The first is Sir Ritter of Vulcaneer, the hero I talked about, the defender of the bridge. He has, because of his elven powers, he has this ability to speak with animals. He has this affinity with animals, and one of them is a falcon named Storm. And Storm doesn't talk, but Ritter can connect with Storm and send um, the bird off to do certain things. It can spy on people, it can listen on people, and ultimately it can attack, and he can attack through it. In the same way you find in other sort of like fantasy realms, like a black cat or a rat for a witch, or in Harry Potter, everybody had their own little familiar. Well, Ritter's familiar is this falcon named Storm. But more to the character point, I think there are really two. One you're going to like and one you're going to hate. The one that you're going to like
Mhm.
is my version of a halfling or a hobbit called Blue Connie. Now, he's not a hobbit like Tolkien Hobbit. This is something called a halterfolk, which is a term that I stole from Scandinavian lore. And the halter folk, these guys are like basically hobbits on steroids. So imagine a hobbit that went to the gym three
Mhm.
times a day, and he's called Blue Connie because he has a face tattoo that looks like a raccoon, that he's painted his face, and his face and his forehead are all blue. And so, and he is sort of the comic relief, for the novels. He says all the things that you want someone to say that's afraid to say because he has no couth, no diplomacy whatsoever. He's a drinker. He's a carouser. He gets into problems when he shouldn't be, having problems, but he is a monstrous berserker warrior who rides a war dog named Jericho. And he fights with these two like razor sharp daggers. And just like like a Viking can go into this sort of like reverie and become this berserker character. And so even though he's this small guy, this half the size of everybody else, he fights with the strength of 10 guys. And so, for him, he's funny because I can use him in certain scenarios. I won't give any away until people read it. I think they'll enjoy it. I get more compliments on him and wanting to know his origin story than anybody else, including the
Mhm.
main characters, because he's just one of these comic relief characters, and I think people like him. The other one is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. He's a man named Incanus Druaith, who is a bone elf, and a bone elf is ashen in color, dark in his hair, and he's an assassin that's sent forth to kill Princess Adeline. And Ritter and he have this friendly, almost Wild West face-off with one another. Ritter trying to save Adeline from Incanus's attacks, and then Incanus, being foiled several times by Ritter, in the first couple of chapters of the novel, really kind of set the scene for what's going to be by book 3 and 4, an excellent epic finish to this heated rivalry that started between the two. But people like him. I actually got someone say to me at a convention once, "Please don't kill Incanus. He is your Boba Fett." And people, if you're a
Mhm.
Star Wars fan, it's the character everybody loves to hate, right? And I've drawn him up so evilly, and he does things that you're like, oh, I hate this guy so much, but you want him in the novels because he makes it a better, sort of like the better plot line. And he's got his own
Mhm.
backstory that people will find out after the series is over. I plan on writing some of these backstories in small novellas so people can kind of figure them out and who they are. But he's, in league with Grey Taurus, and you don't necessarily know that in the beginning, but by the end of book 1, you kind of figure out they're working together. And, I think those two characters are fun to write because people love them, or they they love to hate them. And then of course, Storm is sort of my pet, my intelligent pet for Ritter. And I think that's
Mhm.
fun to have that kind of, magical power that sets him apart from perhaps other heroes.
And I know it must be hard to come up with these characters because I myself have done a whole lot of research trying to find out what are people written about, what new character can I bring, or maybe you find out, oh, somebody already did whatever I want to do. I know you found out in a very tiresome way that creating characters for a fictional book is hard. It's very, very hard, especially in this age right now.
Well, that's where the Dungeons and Dragons comes in. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for 20 years, since I was 10 years old. And, the, the idea that my characters are all battle tested, like I've played them, or players in the game have played them. So in my head, I've grown up alongside them, and they're just as part of my fantasy life as there anything else. And all I'm doing is really memorializing them and putting them in places where it makes sense for them in a plot line, where it's not nearly the same as it was in the game. They're not even in the same campaigns, but you can tell as a dungeon master or even a player in the game when the dungeon master is describing a scene and everybody's looking at you. There's only a few times when it happens, but when you've got them right on point. Like everything you're saying, they're seeing through your eyes. And that's what I want to do as an author. But I've been able to put these characters to the test because their plot lines have intersected, and they're the ones that we remember. They're the ones we talk about, when we're together at holidays or, on the weekends, and something comes up and you make fun out of somebody, you remember that, you throw something at their face because their character did something stupid or something that was really funny that you'll always remember. And you try to capture those things because I had a captive audience that saw it. And, when you have 6 or 7 nerds sitting around and everybody thinks it's funny or everybody thinks it's an epic ending, that's what you want to put in the book because they get my genre. They get the storylines. They know it needs to be told. And so when you hand them something that's unique and funny and good and exciting and it works for them, I think that helps me catapult that into the books. And so my character generation hasn't been nearly as difficult because I've kind of played them. And as goofy as that sounds, in my role-playing games, I've played them, or someone else has played them, and I've seen how they played them. So I'm just capturing that and dropping it in.
Hey, for me it has been hard because I am about a character and then for the sake of it, I just Google and see, has somebody done this? And then I realized, oh my God, I wasn't even the first one on this train because I'm like, what if I do a fusion of everything? And then I realized, oh, somebody already did that and their book is a hit. So if I do the same, I end up looking like I'm the one who copied them. But in reality, I actually had it in my mind. I thought, what if? Or when I'm trying to create a new character down the storyline, it doesn't make sense. It starts going off the road. I'm like, no. With how the story is going, these characters should not be here. These characters should be killed off. And I end up killing a whole lot of characters. And then I just throw away that draft and then I begin again. And then I'm back to square one. I've actually redone that book 4 times. I reach a certain chapter and I'm like, okay, none of these people make sense anymore because the story has evolved and now the characters are just stuck. They look like mediocre characters. I need a new character now. Where do I pop up a new main character from? So I just scrap it. And I'm like, is it people who just have the same mind as me? Do I have fellow bright, creative individuals surrounding me in this planet that they come up with the same ideas that I do? Because that's the thing.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, right? Like, creatives have a tendency to create better with one another. And I also think that, successful novels follow patterns, right? It's called, there's one pattern called the hero's journey, right? And I've seen people, that was sort of like, Joseph Campbell describes it as, a way that, people will respond to a certain plot line, right? And so it was used by, George Lucas to create Star Wars. You've got this character who's alone in the beginning, and Luke Skywalker, who is rescued by his parents, who aren't really his parents, it's his aunt and uncle. And then something happens. There's an event that happens and sets him off this path to this hero's journey. And then he meets characters along the way that help him fulfill that. And there are, inflection points as that happens. And if you layer that Star Wars, drama on top of Harry Potter, it's the same thing. Harry Potter was also an orphan who was raised by his aunt and uncle or people that weren't attached to him. And then instead of Obi-Wan Kenobi coming to get Luke Skywalker, Hagrid comes and gets Harry Potter. And they go away where they're trained. One is a Jedi and one is a wizard. And they meet the evil bad guys, which are Darth Vader and, he who shall not be named in Voldemort. And the stories follow the same. And that trope can pull you through. Your characters can be different, but if you really strip it back, it's like the hero's journey is one of those paths. Or there are writers that use sort of a W format, which is, you start up here at the top of the W and then something happens and the character falls down and the character recovers halfway and then something else bad happens and it falls down. And at the end, it comes back up. And when you're done, the plot line looks like a W where it's like good thing, bad, almost better, bad again, great, we finished and the hero wins. And if you write and people react to that viscerally, and they don't even know what they're listening, watching, reading, or paying attention to, but they're enjoying the story because it's that trope feeling that brings them along. So it's not uncommon that you've written characters that look like something you've seen because those are characters that have resonated with you, right? And even though your character has a different name and is set in a different genre and is doing different things, that's okay. People like tropes. That's why they're successful.
And also with the hero's journey, you find out that the mirroring factor, which is basically the villain backstory, you realize that even you can begin writing and then your villain's backstory is just in darkness, like vengeance, darkness, vengeance, darkness. There's no faults, just going up, 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 up the scale. And then when it reaches its peak, it all just comes crashing down. And then by the time it reaches the bottom, the hero is just standing there and it's like, what next? What should I do next? A second book?
Yeah.
Is the story ending here? Is villain coming back? Because it can get dark. It can get dark. There's sometimes you can write and then you get so absorbed with writing about the villain because you realize that there's this proxy where you as the writer, you're not writing as the hero, you're writing as the villain so that this story gets good. And then the reader is actually not reading as the villain, the reader is reading as the hero. So when you're trying to balance that proxy, you realize you as the writer, you get in tune with your villain that the story gets so dark. And actually, it's weird that most stories right now, there's this balance because for me, I know if I start tuning in with my dark side of my book, it will just get dark, 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 dark. Like, please don't read me kind of dark. And then it all just comes crashing down again. Because I can't find that yin and yang where everything can be a perfect balance, where my character is growing, discovering themselves, discovering that, oh, when I fail, I can rise back again. And then on the other side of this river, I'll have my villain who's trying not to destroy everything in his life, including himself. My book will either have one bad person who's really, really bad, and you have to channel this really, really bad person, and evil will win, or I just go the more classical side, like you said, where we have a character who's growing, who's finding themselves, discovering, falling again, and then rising up, and then falling again, and then rising up eventually to the top. I think a dark book would be great for this generation, like a very dark, dark book where evil actually wins for the first time.
Yeah, you see a lot of there's a kind of trend in that, like the Game of Thrones, not always the good guy doesn't always win,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a choice you have to make for your villains. Like in Darth Vader's example, because we were talking about it, so I'll use it. He has a shot at redemption, and he chooses to redeem himself in the end and come back to the good side. Where Voldemort doesn't, right? And those are the kind of things you have to balance and decide what kind of villain that you want. Is it somebody that's believable? Because it's hard to, I think, for me, as when I read fantasy or sci-fi, someone who's just evil for the sake of being evil doesn't make much sense. Like
Mm-hmm.
something had to happen to them in their backstory, and they chose something that typically a person's trying to do the right thing, but might do something that isn't right, and then they start down a dark path. And in the case of a good villain, you want to have their backstory believable so people can identify with them and say, you know what? If I were in his or her position, I might have done the same thing too. But let's see how they get out of this. Or do they? Do they continue down that path? Do they just can't turn it around? And I think that's just as good and just as important as the hero's journey, right? Like the hero, does the hero win in the end, or does the hero die? Or does the hero fail, and why did they fail? And you want to cheer for them, but like you said, it's okay to share those kind of failures. I mean, look, it's new. People like reading stories, and that's why I think there was so much of a backlash on Game of Thrones that ended in a way that was really dark. And
Mm-hmm.
people were like, what happened here? And they wanted to cheer for Daenerys Targaryen, and instead they got this bad thing that happens. And you're like, oh, like that's not how the series should end. But in the end, was it a bad story? There was enough leak that kind of led you to believe that, well, maybe there is something here. And that's exactly what, George R. R. Martin delivered. So for me, it just depends on the kind of story you want to write. If you want to have a happy ending, great. People like happy endings. If you want to have a dark ending, great. I write dark fantasy. I like dark endings. So it's okay if the hero doesn't win or doesn't win completely. Stalemates are fine because it does set
Mm-hmm.
you up for a sequel or a series or, a celebrity death match in book 3 or 10, whatever it might be. I think
Mm-hmm.
that makes for good characters and memorable ones at that.
Yeah, and speaking of memorable characters, in your book, does book one just end in a cliffhanger, or does it just smoothly pour into book two?
Oh, I'll tell you what, it does both. When I turned it into my editor, the story I had written, I was kind of warned, don't have cliffhangers. They're kind of passe. No one does them anymore. And when he read it, he literally made a note saying, this is where your story needs to end, and take the rest of this and push it into book two. Just get it out of here, because this will get people to buy book two. And he was right.
Hmm.
It literally, even though people were frustrated, they were like, oh, I can't believe you left it there. When's book two coming out? It wasn't like, I'm not going to read book two because I was disappointed. They wanted to know that book two was coming so they could pick up where it left off. And that's where it transitions. And so when The Last Keeper ends, there's a very critical scene in it where one of the characters is facing execution. And it's what happens there. How do they escape that execution, or does the execution happen? And that's what kind
Hmm.
of leaves you off. And then in the very first chapter of book two, it resolves itself. And then the next storyline just sort of like takes off from there. And so Voradin's Lair, is a bit, I don't want to say it's my Empire Strikes Back, to use another Star Wars term, but it's that middle book
Hmm.
where the characters are being developed. In some cases, like Ritter and Adeline begin to fall in love. There are other characters like Damus who's starting to find his footing. He's getting better at harnessing his powers, but is yet still, any kind of rival for Grey Taurus the Mad. Grey Taurus the Mad makes inroads, and he starts to kind of, take the momentum from the battle, and has used his 20 years of stealth and surprise to come onto the world in a big way. And that really sets up what will be book three that just launched in July. But here there's this tale of the epic journey. And you said before that you liked, Lord of the Rings. This is sort of like the Fellowship of the Ring, where the group
Hmm.
travels a long distance, beats away, evil creatures that are trying to stop them, to arrive in the city of Abacus, which is this scholar city, to find this information on how to stop Grey Taurus. And it's buried in these tomes in this mystical library that's part of this ancient giant tree that's in the middle of the city, called Voradin's Lair. And Voradin is the aged wizard, by sort of Gandalf character, that lives in the tree and is a recluse, and is kind of pulled away from all society, and is just dedicated to his own passion for education. And the guy's like 5,000 years old, and they have to go see Voradin to find out how to defeat Grey Taurus. And it's that journey that brings them from Castleshire to Abacus, and it's what happens along that path. And it's where really those two storylines converge, where Damus meets Ritter and Adeline, and they come together as a D&D party and make their way to Abacus, to on their way to a very action packed book two and book three.
Hmm. So your book two has given us an actor who is like the grandmaster of that book, just like how Harry Potter gave us Dumbledore, and also Lord of the Rings gave us Gandalf, and then, Star Wars gave us Yoda.
That's
Basically, you
right.
gave
That's
us
right.
something similar.
I gave us
You
I
gave
gave
us
us
that
Voradin.
guiding light.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This pillar of knowledge, that helps both Damus, who discovers how to find him because he's reclusive. No, he doesn't just see anybody. And then Adeline, who is Elven, and Voradin, they find out, is also of an Elven descent, which is how he lives as long as he does. And it's by her, the nature of her involvement in the book, coupled with Damus's, that bring them together and put them in front of this grand sage, as you said, that imparts knowledge
Hmm.
that they can use in book three to hopefully turn the tide against Grey Taurus and his allies.
Yeah, and is he also as vague as the others? Because you find that the others don't necessarily tell you this is what you're supposed to do. Whatever they tell you is in riddles, or maybe so vague that you end up asking, what? Is your character also just like that?
No, 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 no. In fact,
Oh,
he
thankfully.
practices, yeah, he practices the Socratic method. Like, he sits there and makes them solve it. Like, they tell him what their problem is, and then he asks them questions until they figure it out on their own. And I look at
Hmm.
him as almost as sort of like, look, I could probably tell you what to do, but you're going to figure this out on your own. You're going to appreciate it, because then you're going to own the solution, and you're going to know that it was inside you all the time. And it almost kind of reminds me of like a lawyer, cross-examining a witness where they're trying to extract this information, and the
Mhm.
witness has this moment of clarity where they're like, oh yeah, I get this now. I know why I was called to this case. Same thing with Vordan. He calls them in, and like Socrates, sits there and asks them questions until they figure out the riddle that has been plaguing them. And it gives them little hints and things like that, but it's not very Yoda-ish. It's not, there's, there's no riddles that come from him. He's there to help them solve the riddle, and then he's gone. There's like one appearance of Orion in in the four novels. And he helps kind of turn that tide away from all this momentum that's going for Grey Taurus and his allies into something where now there's a spark of hope that they now know how to possibly beat this guy and what his weaknesses are and know more about him. And then that's what happens in book 3.
Mhm. And speaking of book 3, you told me that it's not out yet. It will be out in a couple of weeks. But just looking at the cover that's out there on your website, I can tell that this book will be a fan favorite
I'm glad
because
you like
the
it.
cover holds so much. You can just see from the cover, it's not what is in book 1, what's in book 2. Book 3 is like there to slap your face with information and tell you, you know what, this is going to get dark, this story is going to get epic, and you won't put this book down. Is that what the book basically is, even without giving
You
us all the
you
information?
nailed it. You nailed it. It's the cover that features Damus and Grey Taurus, right? You've got Damus, who I'm not going to tell you what the candle's for, but he enters
Mm-hmm.
the book
Although we
into
can see
something
it.
called, yeah, that's right. The Trillius Gambit. You'll figure that out by the time you get to chapter 3 or 4. You'll know why he's carrying a candle, but it's him and his white eyes, and it's him and his candles leading him through this darkness. And on the other side of the darkness is this character who has now transformed himself into a magical creature called a lich. He's no longer human because he was, there's reasons for what he's doing. I don't want to get into and ruin the story, but he's now taken on this
Mm-hmm.
almost undead-like form, so that he can continue his battle in eternal battle against his god that he cannot, that he's trying to take revenge on, and Damus is in his way, and it's those two guys coming together to smash heads in book 3 and eventually book 4, which is still a little bit ways off. That won't come out to the end of the year, but the Trillius Gambit I'm looking forward to, because it's one of those books where I wrote it and I was shaking my head saying, I don't know that was this good. And then everybody, my beta readers, my publisher, my editors have all read it, and they're like, oh, this will set up such an epic ending,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I'm like, I just want to write the epic ending, but I didn't want to rush through this. And I think it comes out in a way that most fans of fantasy or any kind of like legend and lore, you're going to find some, Greek mythology, and there's some Native American mythology, and there's some Scandinavian mythology mixed in alongside this entirely unique magic system that brings everything together with this pantheon of gods. And Trillius, from those who've read the first book, understand that he's the god of sport and test. And so Damus, in order to get the knowledge that he needs to defeat Grey Taurus, has to take the Trillius Gambit. And I'll leave it at that. He makes a bet and
Mm-hmm.
goes and challenges the god in this sort of like epic, challenge. And if he succeeds, he wins the knowledge and the power that he needs. And if he fails, not good stuff happens to him. So yeah.
Even though we can't talk about book 3 and book 4 in depth because they aren't out yet and one isn't even finished, I'm sure that by the end of the year, if all goes well and there are no hiccups along the way, people will have these books on their shelves. The whole entire collection, like I said, this is not something you can just read online. The covers themselves are worth displaying. So I think even just before you think of getting the ebook version, you should just invest on getting the actual paperback or hardcover of this book. Do you have hardcovers of these books, by the way?
People can order hardcovers. They just have to ask me online, because my publisher does paperback, ebook, and they're available on audiobook. But hardbacks we can special order for people if they want them. I'm the same way. I have my library is all hardbacks, and I use the paperbacks until they're falling apart.
Mm, yeah. Like I said, collector's items, these are books that are worth being collector's items. because, imagine displaying all four of them. I can't wait to see the fourth cover. And then just imagine displaying all four of them separately in like one row, one shelf. And then everybody coming to your house and like, what is that?
Yeah.
What is that? I have to read it
Well, that's
because
the realm of
the book
Warminster,
sells it.
right? You got it, Ivy. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that.
Basically,
I
the
know
cover
Marks
will
will be
sell the
too.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure I'll just link everything in the description, and I'll make sure everybody checks it out every single time so that they can be sure when the next books are
Thank you.
out, because that book is in 6 weeks, and then hopefully by the end of the year we'll have the fourth book and sadly the last part of the story, because even with the synopsis, even just the snippets like you told us, the story seems amazing. It seems like a real page turner when you when you come to think of it actually.
Well, I hope you like it, and I hope those that might watch this pick it up and take a look at it. You know, I wanted to make sure it was available in as many formats as possible because I know people like to read in different ways, and people like even I cheat and use the audiobook stuff when I'm traveling because it's a little easier than having to just pop it in my ear and listen to it. But you know, I'm excited about it. I've had people ask me what's next, and I can't even get into that because book 4 is not done yet. But I'd like to maybe do some origin stories of some of the more popular characters so people can see the backstory of them in the same way you learn about superheroes in the same way. Like, hey, how did Batman come to be? And tell me about his backstory, or, you know, whatever. It's like Wonder Woman, you know, in the most recent iteration of Marvel or DC. I see the same thing for here. A lot of folks are asking me for it. So I think that's the next thing that'll bridge before that in the next series.
Yeah, but I think that sticking with a similar series like this one would also be epic. Like coming up with a new story, a new map, new characters, totally different concept. I think that
I already got it. I got it.
you
It's
already
ready to
do.
roll.
Great.
It's ready to roll. It's ready to roll. Yep.
Uh-huh, because I'm sure your audience will be sad if they realize, oh my God, we just have four of this. What if we had more? What if we had a new map? And maybe, hopefully, if you join the maps, it becomes an entire world, because that would be epic.
Yeah, that's what I'm working towards. So they could find the map online. I've also put the maps in the books. I put a glossary of terms in the third one so people could reflect on that so they know who, you know, people are, what monsters are. I've also added a couple of, family trees so you could follow along. In book 2, it was sort of like the 7 baronies. In book 3, it's going to be about, elven cultures, stuff like that. In book 4, we'll have a couple more surprises for everybody too.
I'm actually looking at that map right now. I can see everything and I'm loving it. Like the Sylvan Forest and the Bay of Denial. Like the names are so original. Like it's just like any other map you would see of an old world and something. But it's something new. You know, most maps in stories, you just look at them and they're like, ugh, this is not something that could exist in the real world. But this, I actually see this being somewhere. Like if you would give me a map of the old world somewhere in maybe the Nordic days, this could be some place that actually really existed back then.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hoping for. It's something it's believe, you know,
Way.
something that like a medieval culture could believe it. Yeah.
Are there any conventions or maybe, let me see, yeah, basically conventions that people can meet you at, maybe grab a book, meet the author, something like that?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to be in Raleigh, North Carolina in July for GalaxyCon. I'll also be in Austin a little later on in the year, in Texas for another GalaxyCon, and the last GalaxyCon of the year will end up in Columbus around, I think it's November or December. I'll also be in New York for the big Comic-Con in October. And I'm going to do some regional stuff. I live in Pittsburgh. So if you're in the area, I often make my way to bookstores or book clubs and or, you know, smaller venue, you know, conventions like Steel City Con or Sci-Fi Valley or, you know, others that are in the Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Buffalo areas. You'll see me around there, cause those are easy drives, but the GalaxyCon and the Comic Cons are bigger ones. So, if they live closer to any of those places, they can find me there throughout the year. I have a spot on my website that kind of is a coming event, so you can look and see where I'm going to be, and that'll drive you to where I'm going to be. Or you can always reach out to me, and I can tell you where I'm going to be near you, and you can come out and see me and put a name with a face.
Mm-hmm. I'll just link your website in the description and also link the dates on our latest post so that everybody can see it, know where to find you. Maybe fans are not aware. We'll link it. We'll share on social media. We'll share everywhere,
Thank you.
basically. So they can
Thank you
come
very
meet
much.
you, come see your books in person, probably get it signed before you get all famous. You get all Stephen King on us.
Oh, please, please. I would be more than happy to sign any book anybody brings to me. I'm already humbled enough that they would care. I had one guy bring me a baseball card with my face on it. He has author cards, like baseball cards. And I
Uh-huh.
signed it while I was there. He was looking for me to sign one, and he just makes them as a hobby and collects them, but it's all authors. And he finds you at the conventions that you're at and approaches you and you just sign away. So, for me, I was humbled by that. I thought that was a really cool, idea. And it's one that, I remember that one because it was so unique. It wasn't me just signing my book. It was a guy who made a baseball card of me and came up and said, please sign your face. So it was a lot of fun.
Uh-huh. Now you're in a card, laminated in
I,
someone's bedroom, in a showcase glass. People saying, you
uh,
know what, that's my favorite author, he signed that card. It's
in a
unique.
weird kind of way, I like that and I don't at the same time.
Uh-huh. It's weird,
It's
but
fun.
great. It's weird and
It's a lot of
great.
fun. A lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. But as we end this episode, what would be your author's note to the audience about these books themselves?
Yeah. So two things. If you like the novels, in 2024, I've licensed the intellectual property from the novels to a video game company that's making an augmented reality video game out of the realm of Warminster. So if you've ever played Pokemon Go, in 2024, a very similar game called The Realm of Warminster will be out, launched by Melderverse Studios. And then in 2025, they're going to have the virtual reality video game come out as part of that too. So we've got that on one rail. The other rail is I just started to convert my book into a graphic novel. So fans of comics and more adult themed graphic novels, within the next year, will be able to, buy the story in a much different way.
Mm-hmm.
Your pictures and not a lot of my 500 page, novels, but this is going to be more like a decent sized comic book, that they can pick up that, is going to kind of encapsulate that. And I just saw the first 6 frames that are going into it on Sunday night. And I'm excited about that too. So, if they like the stories, be on the lookout. 2024 and 2025 are going to be big years, for graphic novels and for video games. And that'll also help me get a little downtime to start to launch the next series, in the novels as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, good luck to you on that. And I hope I be among the first to test the VR games because
Yeah.
when it comes to comparing between the comics and the games, I am more of a gaming girl. So I hope to test that because maybe next year I'll be starting a brand new YouTube channel for this
Oh,
podcast and also like a main channel where I test games because a lot of authors come here and then they're like, oh, have you played this game? Have you watched this? I was like, maybe this is an idea for a brand new YouTube channel. And maybe your
yeah.
game could be the first that I test, that I personally
I would
test.
love to have that happen. Let's coordinate that offline for sure. And I'll introduce you to the CEO of the video game company as well, because I think he'd make a very good interview for your new YouTube channel.
Oh, I'd love that. But
Yeah.
anyway, thank you so much for being part of this particular episode. And hopefully maybe we'll have you on again where you can teach us about the secrets of D&D for some of us, or maybe
I would
just me
love to
on
do
this
that.
planet who doesn't know how to play it.
I would love to do it. I'll give it a tutorial for everybody. We could spend some time going through it, and I'll walk you through a battle scene. I'll make you have to roll some dice and you'll have a good time with it.
True, because I'm sure you can play D&D from any part of the world. You don't have to be physically there. You can do it on Skype. You can do it on Zoom. You can basically even imagine yourself playing with somebody else. I'm sure you can do anything with D&D.
Yeah,
The
no, I
world's
do that
endless.
now. Yeah, my friends and I get together 6 to 10 on Sunday nights, and we're all scattered around the country, and all in different phases of our life. Some of us have kids, some of us have school, some of us have work that takes us away, and we've moved away, but we've continued to play. and we do it on Skype on weekends, on Sunday 6 to 10, and like you said, you can do it from anywhere. So.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll have you another day here, and then we can talk about D&D, learn the secrets, learn how to be a game master.
Would love to do that. Happy to do it.
Yeah. But anyways, for all those listening, just tune into this episode so that you can know when we are uploading next, and share with your friends, with your family. Tell them we have a new author here who's going to teach us a couple of things in a couple of episodes. And also check out the links in the description, because his website is a place you should land on. Check out his books as well. Leave a rating. Ratings are good. Comments are good. These are things that authors love. We love to hear about what you think about our books, because not everybody will love it. Some people have something to criticize about it. Somebody will have something to tell you, oh, I really don't like your book because it's this and this and this. Or, oh, your book is missing this and this and this. Or maybe your book is not traditional enough for me. So send all your comments, good or bad. We're not haters here. We love the critics. We love the feedback. And until I see you guys next time, stay tuned, and also check out our second podcast for anybody who loves spooky things. We're on there talking about horror things, we're talking about UFOs, we are talking about paranormal stuff. So if you enjoy those things, just tune in on there. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!